These days, the film industry is entirely focused on sequels, prequels, spin-offs, and reboots. Anything original can only be seen in indie films or in dreams. Viewers naturally support this trend, ignoring any originality at the box office and filling theaters for yet another reboot. 15 years ago, it wasn't as harsh, and occasionally something new appeared in theaters. Often, these new releases were hard to watch without tears, but there were exceptions that later turned into sequels and prequels. Among these new series were the Transformers. The series made so much money that films were made even without scripts. Nowadays, this happens frequently, but back in the 2000s, it was a novelty. At their peak, the Transformers grossed over $1 billion. However, as it often happens, if you don't write scripts for the films for too long, the audience starts to suspect something, and the box office plummets. Paramount is still trying to stop the descent into the abyss, but the new Transformers, meant to be a soft reboot, only brought another box office failure. This means it's time to remember this film series and dig into it. The 2007 Transformers film emerged thanks to the Iraq War. The studio was working on the G.I. Joe project, but due to the war, the decision was made to freeze the project because of its strong military focus. Later, it was unfrozen and released in 2009, only to gather Golden Raspberry Awards, end the career of director Stephen Sommers, and not meet the studio's expectations. But in 2003, with the freeze, the decision was made to focus on another Hasbro property, Transformers. Initially, there were no military elements, and the film was supposed to resemble a disaster movie, which was in demand at the time. The studio wanted to make something similar with a twist of big robots. In this version, the robots were supposed to be silent as it was believed that talking robots would look too ridiculous. Steven Spielberg, who appeared among the producers, rejected this idea. He didn't want a disaster movie but rather an alien movie with Transformers. He proposed the idea of a boy in his first car, around which everything else would be built, and the Transformers had to speak. At that time, Spielberg was working on the movie The Island with Michael Bay and decided to bring him on as the director. Bay had to be persuaded as he initially refused, not wanting to make cartoons after The Island. Officially, Bay read some smart books, listened to Spielberg, and unexpectedly developed a genuine fondness for the universe. However, a bag of money might have helped when the genuine fondness was just beginning to form. Plus, he was promised full creative control over the film. By the time he joined the project in 2005, military elements were allowed again, and Bay immediately included them, believing the initial script was too childish. Soldiers with guns were supposed to show that the movie was not for kids. Spielberg, noticing the excessive number of American flags, asked to tone it down so that it didn't look like an army recruitment ad. Bay reportedly agreed, but it's uncertain. This military angle from Bay interested the Pentagon, which allowed filming on military bases, provided soldiers for extras, and supplied tanks, planes, Humvees, and all necessary uniforms. Such extensive military support had not been seen in a Hollywood film since Black Hawk Down. According to one producer, this support reduced the film's budget by at least $50 million. Transformers ended up being an advertisement for everything. Almost everything that appeared in the frame was advertising something. Part of the film's budget was recouped through product placements. Some planned product placements didn't happen. For example, they wanted to use Apple products, but Steve Jobs refused, so he had to turn to other electronics suppliers. Bay initially didn't want to cast Shia LaBeouf, believing there were already enough old-school actors in Hollywood and he didn't want to use pensioners in his film. LaBeouf reportedly returned for auditions, changing his hairstyle and dressing like a typical teenager, and Bay eventually relented and cast him. To keep LaBeouf in character and prevent him from offering creative suggestions, Bay even had dogs set on him at the start of filming. Megan Fox was also put through rigorous physical training as Bay found her suitable but too relaxed. Unlike LaBeouf, who occasionally quietly complained about the cameras being better protected than the actors, Fox found Bay's approach too aggressive, which she later mentioned in interviews, leading to her falling out of favor with Bay. The first Transformers movie cost $150 million and hit theaters in the summer of 2007. It was outperformed only by the sequels of Pirates of the Caribbean, Shrek, Harry Potter, and Spider-Man. The success was tremendous, with the global box office reaching $709 million. It broke all records for DVD sales and rentals in the US, with DVD sales alone exceeding 13 million copies, making it the best-selling release of the year. Total DVD sales in the US were estimated at $300 million. The second Transformers movie became a victim of the writer's strike, which lasted from November 2007 to February 2008. A similar strike is happening now, and future projects might suffer as the Transformers did back then. During the peak of pre-production, the producers were left without a complete script, having only 60 pages of various drafts and a storyline. As a result, the future film included various scenes that were cut or rejected during the production of the first film. Many jokes of varying quality ended up in the movie because Bay, without writers, indulged in his favorite bathroom humor. By the time the strike ended, all filming locations were set, and all necessary equipment was rented and paid for. Although writers were quickly brought back to finish the script, they had to stick to the new ideas and the shooting plan. 3 writers, trying to fit within the constraints, were paid $8 million for their work. According to them, they were most frightened not by the tight deadlines but by Michael Bay, who visited their hotel every day for a couple of months, growling at any attempt to go beyond the set boundaries. Bay later said that the main problem was Hasbro, which constantly came up with suggestions and demands. They needed new Transformers for people to buy different toys. Thus, ridiculous robots that could combine were added to the film. Hasbro executives were delighted. Filming began in early May 2008, and if the first film had a lot of advertising content, the second one set a record for product placement. When Shia LaBeouf had an accident and injured his hand, the injury was quickly written into the script. Officially, Bay supported this addition, but one of the writers, Roberto Orsi, said that it was done to protect LaBeouf's hand from Bay, who didn't intend to give LaBeouf any breaks. Near the end of filming, an explosion caused LaBeouf to be slightly thrown, requiring a few stitches. The doctor said that if the shrapnel had hit him just slightly to the left of his face this time, he would have definitely lost an eye. Despite this, he didn't allow himself to rest and returned to shooting on the same day due to a bunch of jokes related to the hero's parents. They also prohibited the use of the educational institution's name where LaBeouf's character studied in the film. Upon seeing what was happening on set, the administration of Princeton University threatened to sue the studio if they depicted such events in their university. Although they didn't have to pay for military equipment in the second film, the budget for the sequel increased to $200 million. According to Michael Bay, they had to save diligently and forego a couple of expensive scenes. The film was released just 2 years after the first Transformers in the summer of 2009. Despite critics' complaints about the excellent screenplay and the abundance of crude jokes in theaters, it grossed $836 million and became the highest-grossing film of the year in the USA. The franchise's performance reached $300 million, so they were ordered to shoot the third part immediately. Michael Bay initially refused to direct the third part, often thought to be negotiating for more money and $30 million for his film Blood and Sweat, but then quickly organized everything for the promise to direct the third part. The most famous problem with the third Transformers film was Megan Fox's departure. Megan always called Bay a genius in interviews, but after the second film, she also called him Adolf, who stretches barbed wire around the set. Bay said it didn't offend him, but behind his back, Steven Spielberg exploded, ordering Fox to be immediately removed from the film. That's how Rosie Huntington-Whiteley appeared in the third Transformers, the future girlfriend of the author of all famous philosophical statements. Bay personally selected Whiteley. He often filmed videos for the Victoria's Secret brand, where Whiteley happened to work. So, when the director lost Fox, he remembered models who could replace the actress. Since he had just worked with Whiteley last time, he allegedly offered her the role. Initially, the offer went to Blake Lively, and she wanted to appear in the film, but filming for Transformers overlapped with the TV series Gossip Girl, and they couldn't negotiate with the series creators. Filming for the movie took place from May 2010 to November. Besides replacing Fox, Bay was also forced to use a new camera. The studio wanted 3D. The director initially refused, believing the film didn't need it, but they convinced him by introducing James Cameron, who talked about how cool it is to dive into the Mariana Trench, as he was a big Cameron fan. Thus, he immediately agreed, especially since they gave him the most advanced cameras at the time. However, for dynamic scenes, the director still insisted on using regular cameras. In this film, more than 500 cars were destroyed, but once again the studio didn't have to pay for any of them. All the cars were provided by an insurance company the studio worked with, which had suffered from floods. The only cost incurred was for transporting them to the filming location. By the way, the scene from the movie The Island which made it into the third Transformers was due to a failed stunt. The original stunt with Savari didn't work out, and the stuntman got injured. They couldn't replace the stuntman immediately or reshoot the next day, so Bay suggested using a scene from The Island and adding new details to it. The third Transformers film was released in the summer of 2011 with a budget of $195 million. They managed to gross $1.123 billion. This time, fans had to wait 3 years for the sequel. Michael Bay went to direct Blood and Sweat. Since Shia LaBeouf decided to run a prank about his incredible talent and get out of Transformers, there's been a bit of a problem with the titular star. Originally, they wanted to replace the escaped star with a rock, and he wasn't opposed to it. His schedule was booked for a couple of years ahead, and the studio wasn't willing to wait that long. So they settled on Mark Wahlberg, who asked for $18 million for his participation. Wahlberg complied without objections, personally performing almost all stunts. Therefore, Michael Bay praised him all the time, calling him a good actor, even though he opposed the Dinobots in the first 3 films. They managed to include them anyway, but the directors didn't hide their attitude towards them afterwards. They believed that explaining why robots hide by transforming into cars could be justified, but why they take the form of dinosaurs or various animals can't be justified anymore. But apparently, the bag of money was too big, plus they promised him $50 million for 13 hours, so they had to accept the demand to sell new toys while telling stories about what a scary director Ty J. Miller was during the Extinction era. He later complained about Michael Bay, saying he was yelled at every shooting day. After the shoots, the director usually approached Miller and told him, "You're a talentless actor hired just to make everyone laugh." Except no one's laughing. Miller claimed he was threatened multiple times to be cut from the film and replaced with some hamster. Transformers ran into a perennial problem with Hong Kong, involving triads, the Chinese mafia. If anyone doesn't know, from the 70s to the 90s, no Jackie Chan or John Woo film went without a roof. When Hong Kong returned to China, this moment started to shrink, and this ties into the decline of Hong Kong cinema because now film budgets have significantly increased. You had to pay not only the right people but everyone, although previously you could just close the street by talking to the right person. Transformers repeatedly faced problems in this area as it was important cinema for the Chinese and all the bad and suspicious people were immediately dispersed. But there were still a couple of excesses. In one, $13,000 was demanded by Michael Bay, who had his head shoved into an air conditioner and then turned on. But other members of the film crew in Hong Kong detained the extortionists for the second time. In China, the film collected $301 million. This was achieved because they even filmed separate episodes with Chinese actors and showed them only in local cinemas. This allowed the studio's share from the Chinese box office to rise to 37%, whereas typically Hollywood films only receive 25% of the box office earnings in China, with the rest going to Chinese cinemas and local distributors. Therefore, when a film earns exceptionally high revenues in China, it's often challenging to split the box office in half and determine the studio's profit, as China typically retains 75% of the earnings to in the global box office. The fourth Transformers film earned $1.104 billion against a $210 million budget. The film received 2 Golden Raspberry Awards, one of which went to Michael Bay. Despite declining audience ratings, he was ordered to immediately start working on the 5th film, which took another 3 years, partly due to the 13 hours promise made to Michael. The last night gathered a roomful of talented screenwriters, with plans for the film to serve as the beginning of an entire universe. Numerous scripts were considered, some discarded, and others merged. Initially, there was a desire to bring back Shia LaBeouf. Michael Bay contacted him but received a refusal. Eventually, the decision was made to bring back Josh Duhamel's character. The Last Night, the most expensive film in the franchise, cost $217 million to produce and faced numerous problems. During post-production, a test audience drastically reduced the film's length. Originally intended to run for more than 3 hours, nearly 50 minutes were cut, leaving audiences still reeling in their seats. However, further cuts were prevented by Michael Bay. In his opinion, the film just would have turned into a disjointed mess. With a budget of $217 million, the film managed to only collect $605 million, considering an additional $100 million spent on marketing. This was the first film in the series that ended up in the red. One might try to remember the toys and attempt to make the film successful using them, but with Paramount Studios, it's not the case. While Disney manages to profit largely from their toys, Paramount seems to get nothing from Hasbro's toys. A specific percentage is never mentioned, but it's claimed to be something akin to road dust. That's why all these attempts by the studio to launch G.I. Joe are halted, even where there seemed to be a chance to make a couple of dollars to break even. The studio simply can't profit on the side like Marvel Studios does with those same characters. The studio's failure prompted a significant re-evaluation of their plans and a drastic budget cut. They decided to focus on the most popular Transformer and create a sort of soft reboot of the series, which led to the creation of Bumblebee. Initially, the idea was to introduce Bumblebee to a boy again, but this idea was quickly rejected in favor of introducing a girl, bringing something new to the series. Haley Steinfeld was cast in the film. Although Michael Bay remained a producer, he claimed that he didn't interfere with any advice and tried to be on the set as little as possible to avoid disrupting the work of director Travis Knight. The film was shot from August to November, making it the shortest production time compared to base Transformers films, which typically took 6 months to shoot. This allowed for significant savings. Bumblebee, the cheapest film in the series, cost only $135 million. However, the film wasn't without its post-production cuts. After test screenings, about half an hour of Bumblebee was cut, including some episodes connected to previous films in the series, which some attentive viewers couldn't understand. Therefore, the producers decided to reduce the number of such episodes. The director claimed this was done partly to make Bumblebee look like a new film in the series rather than a prequel to the old films, even though it technically is. This resulted in Bumblebee becoming the shortest film in the series, running less than 2 hours. Before this, the shortest runtime was 2 hours and 24 minutes for the first Transformers film. Bumblebee was released in theaters in December 2018, making it the first film in the series not released in summer. With a budget of $135 million, it managed to gross $467 million. Although this was the lowest box office in the franchise at the time, the modest budget allowed the film to break even and make a profit, leading to the creation of Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. For critics, Bumblebee was an incredible breakthrough, a masterpiece that everyone deserved. It received 91% positive reviews from professionals, the highest score among the Transformers films, surpassing the 58% positive reviews of the first Transformers. Bumblebee even received a Razzie Award nomination for restoring the franchise's reputation. Though modest, the film's success and the critical acclaim demonstrated to the studio that they were on the right track, leading to the production of Rise of the Beasts. This film is still in theaters, although it's almost finished its run. With a budget of $195 million, it has so far grossed only $411 million. It might earn another $10 to $20 million, but this time, the supposed right path led to the most significant box office failure in the series. The studio also tried to combine Transformers with G.I. Joe, but what they will do after such an epic failure is unclear. They might take a risk, or in a few years, we could see a true reboot. Critics received this installment much worse than Bumblebee. There is no victory, but this year has seen a natural parade of box office failures. Perhaps the studio will take a chance, as sometimes happens, especially with a studio change, as was the case with the Third Chronicles. However, this seems unlikely here. Thanks for your attention and don't forget to subscribe.